Hi everybody, I'm Mariana and this is Three Peaks Classroom. Welcome back. If you are new here, I am a grade 3 and grade 4 teacher here in Alberta, Canada. Today's episode is the final segment in my 3-part reading series where I'm talking about how I teach reading in my classroom. Just in case you are coming in at the very end, I will link the first 2 videos in the description below. So today we're going to talk about a topic that's actually really important for both teachers and educators, and that is how do you assess your child or your student's reading ability. So whether you're a teacher and you want to be able to learn how to best assess your student's reading level, or if you're a parent and you just want to know how is your child doing with their reading ability. In today's video, I want to cover both a formal and an informal reading assessment, what you need to be prepared, how do you actually do it, and things that you should probably look for when you are assessing your student's reading abilities. So your district probably has like an official assessment program they use across the board that's standardized for all schools. I know in my district, we use Fountas and Pinnell, the benchmark assessment systems. We use it starting in grade 1, but really, truly, in order to assess a student's reading level, you don't need any sort of formal system. I will show you both what a formal system looks like and what an informal reading assessment looks like in today's video. So let's talk about formal testing. When I say formal testing, I mean it's some sort of like a standardized test. Like I mentioned earlier, my district uses the benchmark systems with Fountas and Pinnell. I know lately there's been some controversy and some talk around the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark system.
Boy, with the poodles already.
But that is a conversation that we can have another day. Today, I just want to talk to you about how do you actually do one. So if you got hired in a grade 3 or grade 4 classroom and starting in September, you have to do an FNP test, I want you to be prepared because boy, when I started grade 3, I heard about FNP tests and I did one fake test way back in my university days, but I couldn't remember how to do it correctly. And so today I want to cover all those bases so that you are confident enough to do an FNP test should you be required to do one with your division. So you're going to want to have a couple things ready to go before the student comes to your desk in order to do the reading test. The first thing is obviously the book. This is not an FNP leveled reader by any means. This is just a book that I had laying around. But when you have the benchmark assessment systems in each level, there are 2 types of books. There's a fiction and a nonfiction. So you're going to want to make sure that you grab whichever book you're going to use to test your students' reading. And again, it doesn't matter unless your school mandates that this round we're all doing nonfiction, which I've been at a school that has done that. You're going to want to make sure that you pick the right level of the book, and you're going to want to have your assessment pages ready to go. Now, I've gone ahead and laminated the assessment pages so that it cuts down on printing. You know, every time you do a reading test, it's about 5 or 6 pages per student per level, which is a lot of printing. So I went ahead and laminated mine, and I use a whiteboard marker, and then I take all of that information that I need to remember and I put it into my reading binder. Now, this is something that I do separately. I have my reading binder ready to go on the desk when the student arrives, and I have it flipped open to their page. So if you missed my reading binder and my reading conferencing materials episode, I went all through that in the very first episode in this series. So again, the link is down below in the description. But let's just say I'm going to be testing Anna's reading. I have my reading graph ready to go, and I can see here, oh, Anna, you know, we've been at the same level now for the past 3 times that I've tested your reading. Before she even begins reading, I will flip open to the reading conferencing page that we have talked about, and I'll show her and I'll say, you know, every single time that we've read, I needed you to check for understanding before you flip the page. So that means before you move on to the next part in the book, you need to make sure that you really understand what is happening in the story. So when we do our reading test today, I want to make sure that you are using that strategy so that you can answer the questions at the end of this test. So now you're ready to begin the actual formal assessment part of the reading test. And so it starts by giving them their leveled reader, and on a Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment system book, it will tell them on the bottom, this is a level I book. And I'll say, today, Anna, we're going to test to see if you can read and understand a level I book. And so you give them the book, you read them the title, and there's always a 1-line synopsis on the bottom of the story to kind of get them prepared for their reading. So then you read the title, you read the synopsis, you hand them the story, and then you listen. They're going to open it up and they're going to start reading. And as they're reading, you're going to follow along on these assessment pages. And so, you know, this is a different story, but this book starts with Kate had a loose tooth. Her tooth was very loose. And so if she is reading correctly, then I'm just going to mark each word correctly, dash, 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 dash. If she makes an error, so let's say she tries to pronounce loose, but she says lose. Her tooth was very loose. Then I'm going to write above that word what she actually said. So I would write lose. Or if she omitted a word, so maybe she just didn't read the word very. Her tooth was loose, not very loose. I would also circle that as well. Every time they make an error or every time that they omit a word, that is an error. And under the error column, it says E, you're going to write a dash or 2 dashes or 3 dashes, whatever. If they go back and self-correct, so let's say she's reading, her tooth was loose. Her tooth was very loose. She self-corrected. Those are no longer errors now. So you've gone back and she has self-corrected. So instead of it being 2 errors, those 2 go into the self-correction column now. So while I was still in the classroom teaching, before I went on mat leave, I actually took a short little video of a student with their permission of a reading test, and I'm going to insert that video right now.
For a long time, Edwin wore the wig hat everywhere. He wore it to visit friends. He wore it to...
Once they have completed reading the story, then you're going to add up their accuracy and corrections tally. So on the bottom, there's always subtotals. How many errors did they make and how many self-corrections? You're going to tally them all up until you get a total number. And now this is of course dependent on each story, but on the back side, it gives you an accuracy rate. So if they've made 0 mistakes, then of course they have 100% accuracy. With this story, if they've made 1 or 2 errors, that's 99% accuracy. And it goes all the way up to if they've made up to 10 errors. 10 errors for this book is allowed, and that is a 95% accuracy. So depending on how they do with their comprehension, this could be technically an easy book for them, even though they've made 10 errors. If they have anything below that, then it gets to start to be into the instructional level, or it could be too hard. So that is your accuracy rate. Now you can do a self-correction ratio if you want. I don't find that information helpful at all, but fluency is really important to note too. So maybe they have accurate reading, but maybe their fluency isn't that great. There's also a description here of what the fluency means. So if they have a fluency rate of 0, it means they read primarily word by word, right? So it's kind of hard to listen to them read. But I also like to include that information down in my reading binder, and I'll get to that at the very end as well. So once you have their accuracy rate, then you can go ahead and begin testing their comprehension. Now, at the end of a reading test for an F&P benchmark assessment test, there are different types of comprehension questions. In the lower grades, you have questions within the text. So they should be able to summarize what they have read, retell the story, and you have question prompts here as well. So you would say like, what was her problem in the story? What did she do to try and solve the problem? So these are the things that you would ask the student, and you're watching to see if they have got any of these answers. And then based on their understandings, they either get a 3, 2, 1, or a 0 score. Typically, students that are able to read will be able to get 3 out of 3 in this section, but that's not enough to pass the test. Just being able to retell a story is not enough to pass the reading test in a benchmark assessment system. So then you move on to harder questions here beyond the text. So now you're taking that information and you're making inferences or predictions or whatever. Why do you think she really wanted her tooth to come out? It doesn't say it in the story, but why do you think? So the student would have to come up with some plausible answer like, oh, she really wanted her tooth come out so that she could have a visit from the tooth fairy. And that would be a plausible answer, right? So then you're answering, the student is answering these questions and you're giving them a score. And then out of here, the most they could possibly get just out of the straight questions is 6. But if they have any additional things that they are adding that are relative to the story, then they could have a total score of 7. So you add 1 for an additional understanding. Now, if the student has 7 out of 7, 6 out of 7, and let's say they have a 95% accuracy, they have excellent comprehension and decent enough accuracy that would be an independent reading level for that student, which means they can read it, that's no problem. It's not an instructional level. That means it's not challenging enough for them. But if they have a comprehension of about 5 with a 95% accuracy, so 5 out of 7, then that would be a great instructional level. They have achieved the level I, and that is instructional, which means when you're doing guided reading, that is exactly the level of book or around that book that student should be using in order to be practicing their reading strategies. So one thing that I do when I do a formal reading test with my students, or an informal test, I guess, is I always take this information and I always include it in their reading conferencing binder. If I'm taking the time to test their reading, which takes about 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes, depending on how quick you are, I want to include that information because it's a formal test. I am testing you right now. I want to see how you're doing without any sort of intervention from me. So I will write down on here on my log that I am doing an FMP test. We are testing level I or whatever. Here's what they're doing. And I will write down what's their accuracy, what's their fluency, and what was their comprehension. And at the very end, if they achieved the level, then I'll say, awesome, you passed level I. I will flip to the graph and I will get them to fill out level I right then and there, and we celebrate. We say, good job. I see that you were working really hard with your strategies, and here now you can see that you've bumped up that level. So that is how I incorporate my reading binder materials. Again, this is a free download as well. If you want to go to my website, 3peaksclassroom.com/reading binder, you can get all the materials that you want to use for your own classroom as well. But when I'm doing a formal reading test, I use that information in my reading binder as well, so that when a parent comes and asks me, how did they do on their last reading test? I don't have to scramble to remember what everything was. I have it right here. Everything is in my reading binder, and I can happily and confidently answer their question. So an informal test actually doesn't look that different from a formal test. The only difference is the lack of materials. So with an informal reading test, we call those running records. You're not going to have these pages with all the words filled out and you just mark them and circle them. You're not going to have the comprehension questions. You're not going to have the accuracy rates listed. You're not going to have any of that if you're doing an informal test. When you are doing an informal test, all you need is a book and a piece of paper to do your running record on. So the way that you do a running record is you sit with the student next to you, you have them open the book, and you are following along. And on your piece of paper, you are writing marks for each word that they are doing correctly. And when they sweep left to the next line, you also sweep left on your paper as well, so that you can keep track. If they make any errors, you circle them. If they self-correct, again, you write down that they self-correct. So you're writing all that information down, but you are the one responsible for writing that all down. So you're not writing the words down, you're just checking if they got every single word correctly. At the end of a running record or like an informal test, and again, they're not reading the whole book, they're just reading a certain section of it so that you have an idea of what they are struggling with. You can also ask them some basic comprehension questions to gauge how they are comprehending the story that they are reading. If they are struggling with comprehending the story and you want to support them in a guided reading group, or if you want to give them a strategy for them to work on, but you're not sure exactly what strategy to tell them, I do have a free download that you can use from my website, 3peaksclassroom.com/guided reading. And here you can have 4 pages of reading strategies that you can draw on if you want to conference with your students and say, okay, I noticed that you're not able to really retell me what happened in the story. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to try this strategy. And then that will help you to get your students on their way in order to develop their comprehension strategies. At the end of the day, it does not matter which way you assess your student, formally or informally. Now, of course, we have district mandated tests, so you might have to do it this way, and that's okay. But if you're just noticing that, hey, this student is doing really well and I want to do like a quick little test to see if they are bumping up a level or whatever, you're welcome to do an informal test as well. The purpose of any sort of reading assessment is to give ongoing constructive feedback to the child so that they know how they could be best improving in their reading ability. The point of a reading test is not to label them with a level. So although I mentioned it in my reading binder that we have certain levels, I never make it a big deal like, oh, you are a level I when you should be a level M. We never have that kind of language in my classroom. It's always, are you progressing? Do I see a staircase in your reading graph? Because that's what I want to see. It doesn't matter where you are on the graph. I want to see that every time I'm meeting with you, you are working towards building those strategies to help you read. So I want to see that staircase progression. So that's it. That's a wrap on today's video on how to do a reading assessment. Remember that regular assessments and targeted intervention are crucial to helping any student develop and succeed in their reading abilities. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more educational content. And you might want to consider hitting the notification bell as well so that you can be notified when I do post a new video so that you can watch it right away. All right, and as we head into the summer months, I'm going to be doing a lot more lighthearted videos like book recommendations or activity or lesson recommendations that you can use in your classroom. So I hope you consider subscribing to my channel and sticking around. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video and I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.